My name is Marikana. I am 31 years old. I am a chartered accountant working at a mid-size audit firm in Pune. I have spent the last 7 years of my professional life reading financial documents carefully. Contracts, statements, balance sheets, loan agreements. Because I was trained to find the sentence buried on page 4 that changes everything. It is deeply ironic, then, that the most dangerous document in my life was not a client's file. It was buried inside my own brother's wedding folder. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started, which is not at the wedding and not with the email, but 14 years ago, in the kitchen of our family home in Nagpur, when I was 17 years old and Rohan was 22, and I understood for the first time what the word reliable meant inside our family. It did not mean trustworthy. It meant available for sacrifice. Rohan was my parents' elder child, their son, and in the unspoken geography of our household, he occupied a different country entirely from the one I lived in. Not because my parents were cruel people in the obvious sense. They were not. My mother, Sunita, was warm and funny and made the best chai I have ever tasted. My father, Ramesh, worked hard his entire life and genuinely believed he was raising both children fairly. But there is a kind of unfairness, so structural, so quietly assumed, that the people inside it stopped noticing it at all. Rohan's mistakes were explained. Mine were examined. Rohan's needs were urgent. Mine were optional. Rohan's ambitions were investments. Mine were expenses. I noticed the pattern before I had the language to name it. At 17, what I had was a feeling. A low-grade hum of something wrong that I had learned to keep quiet because the one time I had said something directly, my mother had looked genuinely confused, as if I had pointed at empty air and called it a wall. The first time I covered for Rohan, I was in my final year of school. He had borrowed money from a friend's father, a significant amount, for a trip his friends were planning, and then lost most of it in a card game. The man called our house. Rohan cried in my room that night. He said Papa would stop paying his college fees. He said Mama's heart would break. I gave him my savings from 3 years of tutoring neighborhood children. Every rupee of it. He promised to repay me within 6 months. He never mentioned it again. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that it came from love, not obligation. I was 17 and I believed the family story we were all living inside, which was that Rohan was the one with the difficult path and I was the one with the steady hand, and that was simply how things were distributed. I believed that story for several more years than I should have. By the time I had completed my CA qualification and joined the firm in Pune, Rohan had attempted 3 businesses in 5 years. A clothing export idea that never left the planning stage, a food delivery service that lasted 2 months, a franchise arrangement that turned out to be a scam, though Rohan maintained to this day that he had been cheated, not reckless. Each time, my parents urged me to help, not with the word forced, always with softer language. You're so good with money, Mira. You understand these things better than we do. Rohan just needs a little support to get started. You know how sensitive he is. I understood what I was being asked. I also understood, by then, that saying no would make me the problem. So I loaned Rohan money. I documented it properly, the way I would document any transaction at work. Written agreements, amounts, repayment schedules. My family found this embarrassing. My mother once said, with genuine sadness, that she hoped I would not treat family like a bank ledger. I did not tell her that treating it like a bank ledger was the only way I had managed to track how much had already disappeared. The total, by the time I was 28, was a little over 22 lakh rupees. Across several loans, across several years, across several promises that thinned and eventually dissolved entirely. Rohan never repaid a rupee of it. He also never acknowledged that he owed it. My parents never acknowledged it either. In the version of events that circulated at family gatherings, I was Mira, the successful one, the reliable one, who had done very well for herself and was always so generous with her brother. I learned to smile at that description. It cost me nothing by then. I had already accepted that the accounting inside our family would never reflect the actual numbers. What I had not accepted, what I was not prepared for, was what happened when Rohan found Ishita. Ishita Mehta was the daughter of a real estate developer whose firm had projects across 3 states. She was intelligent, well-spoken, and genuinely kind in a way that made me think, in the early months, that perhaps she would be good for Rohan. That perhaps the weight of being loved by someone with real expectations might change something in him. Instead, Rohan changed his story. In the version of his life, he presented to Ishita and her family. The failed businesses became learning experiences. The borrowed money became early-stage investment losses that any entrepreneur faces. Our parents were described as established and comfortable. I was described as a senior financial professional whose endorsement of Rohan's character carried weight in professional circles. Everything true. Everything angled to face the wrong direction. When the engagement was announced, the wedding grew immediately from something modest into a destination event. Rohan chose a heritage rooftop property in Udaipur. 3 days of ceremonies, 200 guests minimum, a photographer flown in from Delhi, a coordinating team, imported flowers. A menu built by a catering group Rohan had seen at a friend's reception and decided was the only acceptable option. Ishita's family, I later learned, agreed to fund the majority of the arrangements on the condition that Rohan's family demonstrated a meaningful contribution. It was not an unreasonable condition. It was, in fact, a standard expectation at this level of wedding in this social circle. Rohan assured everyone that his family would contribute significantly. 2 months before the ceremony, he called me. He did not begin with a request. He began with a conversation. Warm, chatty, the version of Rohan that appeared when he needed something. He asked about my work. He said he had been thinking about how much he appreciated my stability over the years. He mentioned, casually, that the wedding coordination was more expensive than expected. I waited. He asked for 15 lakh rupees. I said no. He did not argue. He sounded almost cheerful. He said he understood completely, that he had expected my answer, that it was fine. 3 weeks later, the email arrived. I have already told you what was in it. 5 conditions. My mother's heart emoji. My father's 4 words. But I have not told you about the attached document. The release form buried at the bottom of the email, the one that required my signature to finalize. I almost missed it. It was formatted to look like a standard no objection certificate, the kind that gets attached to family property transactions. But I am a chartered accountant. Reading attached documents is something I do before I breathe. On the 3rd page, in language designed to be ignored, was a clause stating that I acknowledged and ratified all prior financial arrangements made in connection with the Kana Mehta wedding project, including guarantees, commitments, and representations made to vendors and financial institutions on behalf of the family. I read that sentence 4 times. Then I called my colleague Anjali, who handles financial fraud cases at a firm we collaborate with, and I read it to her. She told me not to sign anything and to check my CIBIL score immediately. I logged in. My credit history looked normal at first. Then I found it. An inquiry from a non-banking financial company made 8 months earlier, connected to a company called Prism Celebrations Private Limited. I had never heard of this company. I had never applied for any credit through them. I searched the MCA registry. Prism Celebrations Private Limited. Registered 7 months earlier. Director, Rohan Khanna. Registered address, my parents' home in Nagpur. Personal guarantor listed on the loan application. Mira Khanna, chartered accountant. The loan amount, 85 lakh rupees, almost entirely drawn. I sat at my desk for approximately 4 minutes without moving. Then I opened a new document and began writing. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Divya Rao. I had used her for 2 of the earlier loan agreements with Rohan, which meant she had the full documentation of every amount he owed me. I forwarded everything. Divya instructed me not to contact my family, not to reply to the email, and not to mention the credit inquiry to anyone connected to the wedding. With my authorization, she contacted the lending institution. They confirmed that a personal guarantee had been filed using a scanned copy of my PAN card, my income tax returns from 2 years prior, documents I had once shared with Rohan when he asked me to review a business plan, and a declaration stating that I held a 25% ownership stake in Prism Celebrations. I had never heard of this company until 3 hours earlier. The transaction history was precise and damning. Payments to the Udaipur property, payments to the florist, the catering company, the photographer, the transport coordinator, payments to a jeweler, payments to Rohan's personal credit card, 1 payment to a foreign account I did not recognize. Divya explained what the release form was designed to do. My signature would not legalize the fraud retroactively, but it would create a document I had signed, voluntarily, apparently, acknowledging prior financial commitments. It could complicate the investigation. It could delay consequences. It could give Rohan's attorney a thread to pull. Suddenly, the 5 conditions made complete, cold sense. The money demand would cover the overdrawn wedding account. The apology would create witnesses who heard me call our financial history a misunderstanding. The bracelet. In the original email, Rohan had demanded I bring our grandmother's gold set to present as a family heirloom at the Mehendi, would support the wealthy family image he had built for Ishita's parents. The humiliating seating arrangement and phone restriction would keep me present but silent. The apology speech would make me a public validator of every lie he had told. He did not want me at his wedding. He wanted my signature, my assets, and my silence in one room. I paused here because another message had arrived while I was reading Divya's notes. It was from Rohan. I know you've seen the email. Don't make this about yourself. Mama is already anxious. Sign the documents tonight, transfer the money before noon tomorrow, and we can discuss your feelings about the seating after the wedding is over. If you refuse, I will make sure everyone in this family understands that you tried to destroy my marriage because no one has ever chosen you. I read it twice. Then I took a screenshot and sent it to Divya. The next morning, I filed an identity theft complaint. I froze my PAN card from further use in loan applications. I placed a flag on my credit file. I notified my firm's compliance officer. Divya filed a dispute with the lender and began preparing documentation for a police report. My mother called 11 times over 2 days. Her messages followed a pattern I recognized from childhood. First, gentleness. Mira, Beta, just think about how hard Rohan has worked for this day. Then, pressure. The Mehtas are a respected family and your absence will embarrass everyone. Then, fear. Divya has spoken to someone at the NBFC. Please don't make this into a case. Then, finally, the sentence she always kept in reserve for when everything else failed. I don't know how I raised a daughter who could do this to her own brother. I listened to each voicemail once. I did not call back. My father came to Pune. He sat across from me in my flat and told me that families do not take each other to court. I told him that families also do not forge each other's financial documents. He said the details were complicated and that Rohan had probably made some assumptions about what I would approve. I asked him whether he had read the 5 conditions email. He said the email was not important. Only the relationship mattered. I asked him whether he knew that Rohan had listed my name as a loan guarantor for 85 lakh rupees without telling me. He looked at the table. That silence told me everything I needed to know about how much my father already knew. He said Rohan needed the money because the Mehtas expected a certain level of contribution from the Khanna family. I said the Mehta family deserved to know the truth about who was actually contributing. Papa said I was being dramatic. I opened my front door. He said if I did not attend the wedding, I would lose my family forever. I said the family was already lost every time someone asked me to absorb damage that Rohan had created. I was simply no longer standing on the side that bleeds. He left. That evening, I opened my laptop and booked a flight to Srinagar, leaving 2 days before the Udaipur ceremony. I had been meaning to visit Kashmir for 3 years. Every time I had planned the trip, something with Rohan had interrupted it. A payment crisis, a document he needed, a family emergency that somehow always ended with me writing a checkwi. Not this time. Before leaving, I assembled a box. Pause here. I want to be clear about what I was doing, because I want you to understand the difference between revenge and truth. I did not create any document. I did not fabricate any statement. I did not write anything designed to hurt, only things designed to clarify. Every page inside that box was either a document Rohan had signed, a message he had sent me, or a legal notice relevant to the people whose lives he had built his wedding on top of. Divya reviewed the contents carefully. She removed 2 items she felt could compromise the investigation if made public early. What remained was enough. I ordered a sandalwood document box, the kind sold at craft stores in Pune for gifting. On the brass plate on the lid, I had engraved 3 words, "For the future you built." Inside the box, I placed a black folder with 6 sections. The first section was a letter addressed to Rohan. It read, "You gave me 5 conditions for my presence at your wedding. Here is my single condition for remaining in your life. You will never again use my name, my PAN card, my financial history, my money, or my silence to construct a version of yourself that does not exist." The second section was my identity theft affidavit, denying authorization of the Prism Celebrations loan guarantee. The third section was the guarantor document itself, with the forged signature and false ownership declaration. The fourth section was a legal notice confirming that all previous unpaid loans, totaling 22 lakh rupees, had been referred for civil recovery. The fifth section was Divya's preservation order, instructing Rohan not to delete any financial records, communications, or business files associated with Prism Celebrations. The sixth section was a sealed white envelope addressed to Ishita Mehta. I want to tell you about that envelope. Ishita's name appeared on several vendor contracts connected to the wedding. She was also the person being asked to begin a marriage without knowing how it had been financed. The envelope contained Rohan's 5 conditions email, his messages demanding retroactive approval, a brief note from me explaining that I had never agreed to fund the wedding, and a summary Divya had prepared of the financial documents Ishita could verify through her own legal counsel. I did not want to hurt Ishita. I wanted her to have information before she combined her finances, her name, and her family's reputation with someone who had spent months treating all 3 as collateral. Beneath the folders, I placed our grandmother's gold set in its original velvet pouch, along with a copy of the will excerpt proving it had been left specifically to me. A note to Ishita read, "Rohan promised you something he did not own. I am showing it to you so you understand the difference between a gift and property taken through pressure. The set will be returned to me after you have read this." The courier would wait for her acknowledgement and then bring the jewelry directly to Divya's office. I sealed the box, arranged the courier, and gave Divya the delivery window. The box would arrive during the reception. At the moment, Rohan had scheduled a public gift presentation because he had announced in the wedding group chat that his sister in finance would be presenting the family's contribution. He had already told the guests I was coming. He had already described my gift as a major contribution to their future. He had scheduled a microphone moment. I let him keep the schedule. I replied to his email with one message. I will not attend the wedding or fulfill any condition. A gift will be delivered during the reception. All further financial communication must go through my attorney, Divya Rao. His response came in 40 seconds. Stop performing. You're attending. He called 3 times. I declined each call. His voicemail said, Mira, this is not one of your audit meetings. You don't get to send a lawyer's letter and disappear. Ishita's father is expecting your contribution this week. I've already confirmed it. Fix this and call me today. That voicemail told me he had already spent money. He claimed I had committed. Divya sent a limited legal notice to the Mehta family's property company, informing them that I disputed all financial commitments connected to Prism celebrations. Rohan did not know that yet. I flew to Srinagar the morning of the rehearsal dinner. Before you go further in this story, pause for 1 second. If you have ever been the person in your family who is called reliable but meant available, I want you to leave a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from, because the next part of this story is for you specifically, and I want to know how many of us there are. Subscribe if you haven't already. Every single story I tell here is for exactly this kind of person. Now, what happened at the wedding? I was asleep in my hotel room in Srinagar when it happened. I know the details from 3 sources. A partial recording one of my cousins sent me the following day, the courier's timestamped delivery confirmation, and Rohan's voicemails, which were extensive. The reception was in the rooftop hall of the heritage property, lit with marigold strings and candles. By all accounts, it was genuinely beautiful. Rohan had taste. I had always acknowledged that. What he lacked was the money to pay for it without stealing it. The gift presentation was scheduled between dinner and the cake ceremony. Rohan had placed a small stand near the main table. He had told the wedding coordinator to bring the box when it arrived because his sister's contribution was the highlight of the evening. The courier arrived at 8:47. Signed delivery confirmation went to Divya's phone. Divya messaged me. Delivered. I set my phone down and looked out the window at the lights on the water. Rohan received the box at the table. My cousin told me later that he looked genuinely pleased when he read the engraving. He lifted it slightly, feeling the weight. He smiled at Ishita's parents. He made a short speech about siblings, forgiveness, and what it meant to have a sister who had always supported him. He talked about how my absence tonight was only because of work pressure, but that my gift proved our bond was unbreakable. The guests applauded. He opened the lid. Inside was the black folder. He opened the folder. The first page began, "You gave me 5 conditions for my presence at your wedding." My cousin said his smile did not disappear immediately. It froze first. A second of stillness before the blood left his face. He tried to close the folder. Ishita was standing beside him, and she saw the words Prism Celebrations Private Limited printed across the second page before he could pull it shut. She reached for the folder. He stepped back. Her father, standing 2 feet away, asked what the document said. Rohan called it a private family matter. Then the sealed white envelope addressed to Ishita slid from the folder onto the tablecloth. She picked it up before he could reach it. Ishita did not open it dramatically. She turned away from the table slightly, the way you turn when you need a moment, and she read quietly. The guests closest to the table were watching. The photographer was still shooting. Her father moved to stand beside her. She passed him 1 page without speaking. Rohan said the documents were being taken out of context by a sister who had always resented his success. Ishita's father asked 1 question. "Did you list Mara as a loan guarantor without her knowledge?" Rohan said I had verbally approved everything and was now using legal language to cause problems because I was bitter about missing the wedding. Ishita looked up from the envelope. She said, quietly, "Then show me the written authorization." He said I had never given written authorization because the arrangement was based on family trust. She said, "Then show me any message from Mira approving this." He could not, because I had not approved it. There was no message. There was only his assumption that I would absorb it the way I had always absorbed every other thing. Ishita's father stepped away from the table and made a phone call. He had already received Divya's legal notice earlier that week and had quietly asked his company's legal counsel to review it. The counsel had identified several discrepancies in the vendor contracts. He had been watching Rohan carefully for 2 days. Rohan attempted to take the folder from Ishita. She stepped back and told him not to touch her. My mother appeared at the table. She told the guests that siblings sometimes managed each other's accounts informally and that I had always found ways to make Rohan look bad because I was competitive. She called the documents a misunderstanding and asked everyone to please enjoy the dessert. Then Ishita read aloud the message Rohan had sent me, the one where he threatened to tell everyone I was trying to sabotage his marriage because no one had ever chosen me. Rohan said the message had been edited. Ishita's father told him to unlock his phone and show the original. He refused. That refusal, more than any document, more than any signature, was the moment everything ended. Ishita left the hall with her mother. Her father remained and spoke privately with his attorney for 40 minutes. The speeches were canceled. The band played one more set and stopped. The cake was never cut. The photographer later told my cousin that he had quietly kept shooting throughout because he had been hired to document the evening, and the evening had not ended. Rohan moved between the remaining guests, arguing that I had fabricated the documents, that the NBFC was run by corrupt people, that Ishita's family was using a minor misunderstanding to escape a commitment they had grown cold on. None of these explanations held because the lender's fraud department had independently contacted the Mehta family's legal counsel 3 days earlier. Divya had not arranged that contact. The lender had initiated it themselves when they identified the forged guarantee on their own review. My father called 43 times before morning. His first voicemail ordered me to contact Ishita and tell her the box was a cruel private joke. His second blamed me for the family's reputation. His third, sent at 2 in the morning Udaipur time, was frightened. The bank, he said, had called him. Rohan had listed our parents as secondary parties to the loan. There was a document my father had signed 8 months ago that Rohan had told him was needed to reserve the venue. My father had not read the attached pages. I sent one message to my parents. Please speak to an attorney immediately. Do not destroy or delete any document Rohan has given you. All communication with me must go through Divya Rao. I went back to sleep. In the morning, I hired a shikara on Dal Lake and sat in it for 2 hours with tea and the newspaper and the mountains, which were entirely indifferent to everything that had happened the previous night in Udaipur, and I was grateful for that indifference. The consequences, when I returned to Pune 12 days later, were already assembled. Ishita filed for annulment on grounds of misrepresentation and financial fraud. Her family's legal team had completed their own review of Prism celebrations and found irregularities beyond the loan guarantee. Vendor contracts signed in Ishita's name without her knowledge, a property representation made to the NBFC claiming partial ownership of her father's assets. Rohan had been building a financial structure on other people's names for 2 years. The NBFC removed me as guarantor and referred the suspected forgery to economic offenses investigators. Divya filed a civil recovery action for the original 22 lakh in loans, plus legal costs, plus damages connected to the identity theft. Rohan attempted to transfer his car and 2 business assets to a friend. The transfers were flagged immediately because the assets were under legal hold. Our parents, when they finally met with their own attorney, discovered that the document my father had signed was not a venue reservation confirmation. It was a secondary guarantee statement connected to the Prism Celebrations loan. The attorney told them to cooperate with investigators and stop receiving documents from Rohan. My father called me once more. His voice was different. The authority was gone. What remained was an old man who had spent 40 years believing his son's explanations and was now learning what those explanations had actually cost. He said, "I didn't know it was this bad." I said, "I know, Papa, but I need you to understand something. Every time you and Mama told me that families don't keep score, every time you asked me to forgive a loan, absorb a cost, or stand beside him and smile, you were teaching Rohan that the accounting never mattered, that there were no consequences. He learned that lesson completely." Papa did not speak for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry." It was a small sentence. It did not undo 22 lakh rupees or 7 years or the 5 conditions email, but it was real. It was the first sentence he had ever said to me that did not contain an explanation for Rohan built into it. I told him I needed time. He said he understood. We stopped speaking for 3 months. During that time, my parents attended counseling, which Divya had mentioned as a possibility and which I had not expected them to actually do. When we met again, my father did not ask me to withdraw the civil case. My mother did not say blood was thicker than money. They sat across from me in a restaurant in Nagpur and they told me, together, that they had spent 30 years managing Rohan's feelings at my expense, and that they had told themselves it was practicality rather than favoritism, and that they understood now it was both. My mother said, "We called you strong because it was easier than protecting you." I had never expected to hear that sentence. I had never allowed myself to want it, because wanting it felt like setting myself up for a loss I couldn't afford. I did not cry. I looked at her and said, "I know. I believe you." I told them my conditions. They could not carry Rohan's messages to me, pressure me to reduce the recovery amount, or discuss his case at family gatherings I attended. If they crossed those lines, I would leave the conversation. They agreed. My mother cried. I did not change the conditions to stop her tears. Over the following year, the conditions settled into a new normal. Not the old warmth, not the pretending. Something more honest and therefore more durable. The legal process concluded 14 months after the wedding. Rohan accepted a settlement agreement involving fraudulent use of identifying information, filing false financial declarations, and forging documents for a lending application. He avoided criminal custody on the condition of full restitution, community service, financial ethics supervision, and a 2-year restriction on managing client funds or serving as a company director. His car was surrendered as part of asset liquidation. His personal accounts were reviewed. Sale proceeds covered part of the Prism Celebrations liability and a portion of my civil recovery claim. I recovered approximately 16 of the 22 lakh in original loans. Legal fees absorbed some of it. The remaining amount became the subject of a long-term repayment order attached to whatever income Rohan could demonstrate. The number mattered less than the formal acknowledgement that it was real, that it had always been real. That calling a loan a misunderstanding did not make it disappear. Ishida's annulment was granted. She contacted me 6 months after the wedding. She thanked me for sending the box. She said she had suspected something was wrong for months, but had told herself she was imagining it. She said the document with my name on it was the first thing that made her understand the pattern was not limited to her. I told her she did not owe me an apology. Rohan had built different stories for different people and made questioning him feel like betrayal. She had been given a carefully constructed fiction. She said, "I keep thinking about that envelope with my name on it, that you addressed it to me personally. Not to embarrass me, just to tell me the truth. I said, you were marrying him. You had the right to know. We are not close." But we parted with respect, which is more than I expected. Rohan sent me 3 messages in the year after the wedding. The first demanded that I withdraw the civil case because he had suffered enough. The second offered to forgive me if I dropped the recovery claim, stopped discussing the case with relatives, and told the investigators I had misunderstood the loan documents. The third was a long voice note sent at 2 a.m, in which he said he had lost everything and asked me how I could live with myself. I listened to the third one once. It confirmed what I had suspected since the 5 conditions email, that Rohan had never, at any point, understood the distinction between consequences and punishment. In his version of events, he had not lost his marriage, his income, and his reputation because of choices he made. He had lost them because I had stopped protecting him from the results. I blocked him after the 3rd message. I want to tell you about Kashmir. Not about the legal victory, not about the courtroom, not about the final numbers. About the 2 weeks I spent in Srinagar while my brother's carefully constructed world disassembled itself in a rooftop reception hall 4 states away. I had imagined, before leaving, that I would feel triumphant, or at least relieved. What I felt for the first 3 days was fear. Not that I had done the wrong thing. I was certain I had done the right thing. But the fear that clarity doesn't protect you from loss. That doing the right thing and losing everything can happen in the same week. On the 4th day, I took a guided walk through the old city. We passed a woman at a window, 2 floors above the lane, rolling something in her hands, looking out without seeing us. My guide said she had lived in that building her whole life. I thought about how much of my energy I had spent making myself small enough to fit into spaces that had been allocated without my input. The kitchen stool, the 5 conditions, the seat near the service entrance. On the 6th day, I joined a group for a trek to a small meadow above the city. It took 3 hours upward. At the top, there was only grass and cold air and complete silence except for wind. I sat there for 40 minutes. I did not think about Rohan. I did not think about the box. I thought about the smell of the air and the fact that I had come here to this specific meadow on my own. On the 9th day, Anjali messaged me to say the lender had formally removed my name from the Prism Celebrations file. I was eating breakfast. I read the message. I put my phone down. I finished my eggs. That is how it felt. Not fireworks. Not a speech. Just the quiet return of something that should have been mine all along. When I returned to Pune, I went to my office, filed a stack of pending audit reports, and had lunch with my colleagues. Nobody at work had known the full picture. I had told them only that I was dealing with a family financial matter and would need some flexibility for a few weeks. They had given it without questions, which is the kind of workplace I had been fortunate to build. That evening, Divya called to go through the final recovery calculations. At the end of the call, she said, "You handled this with more discipline than most of my corporate clients." I said, "I spent 7 years being told by my family that keeping careful records was cold. I am glad, finally, that I kept them." The grandmother's gold set sits in my flat now, in its original velvet pouch, on the shelf beside my CA certificate. I wore it once, to a colleague's wedding in December. It felt, for the first time, like a piece of jewelry that belonged to me rather than a territory I was defending. I do not know whether Rohan changed. Change of that depth takes longer than a court order and requires something he has not yet demonstrated. The capacity to hold himself accountable to someone other than a judge. What I know is that he cannot use my name anymore. He cannot use my PAN card. He cannot use my silence as consent. He cannot use my reliability as a weapon. That is not everything, but it is enough to begin. People sometimes ask whether I regret sending the box to the reception rather than through attorneys alone. I ask them to consider what my silence had cost for 14 years, not just the 22 lakh. The trip I never took because Rohan's staff needed to be paid. The boundaries I apologized for. The times I explained myself in rooms where explanation was not required. Rohan created the public moment. He booked the microphone. He announced the gift to 200 guests. He invited me to be the evidence of his success in front of the family he had most needed to impress. I simply sent him the accurate version of that evidence. The difference between revenge and truth is that truth does not require you to be there when it lands. If you have stayed with me through this entire story, I want to ask you one thing. If your family gave you 5 conditions for belonging, how many would you complete before you realize that belonging purchased through self-erasure is not belonging at all? Drop your answer in the comments. Someone reading it tonight may need that exact permission. Share this with anyone who has ever been called the reliable one in a room where reliable meant available for sacrifice. And subscribe. Because every story I tell here is built for exactly the person who most needed to hear it. Thank you for being here. I mean that. You stayed. That matters. My name is Marikana. I am 31 years old. I am a chartered accountant working at a mid-size audit firm in Pune.